Hello and welcome to a special one-off webinar on international SEO that's being released this week instead of our regular This Week in Organic show. I'm David Bain, and today we're taking the opportunity to focus on international SEO with three SEO gurus, looking at what to consider when you're setting up a new international site, how to deal with international SEO issues, and also what's happening with SEO now in 2015 and beyond into the future. So let's meet the three international SEO experts joining me today. So starting off with Michael B.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for saying I'm an expert. I really like that.
Oh yeah, you'll prove it over the next hour or so, I'm sure, Michael. Yeah. So
Well,
what's your full name? Where you're from in terms of organization, and what brought you here today?
Sure. My name again, it's Michael Bonfils, or Fils, if you speak French. I am part French and actually part Quebecois and part Greek. And I live here in the U.S. and I run a company called International Media Management, and there's a division of the company that I'm known for. That's SEM International, which does all SEO, paid display for a lot of big agencies and big clients around the world. I'm a huge advocate when it comes to international search. I've been so since I started the company back in 2003. I started in search marketing in '96, and my background is international business and studying cultures, and it's something I'm extremely passionate about. And so I built a company around two things that I love, which is working internationally and working with multinational challenges in search.
Trop bien. But I won't continue past that. Yes. Next up is Michael F.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on the show today. So my name is Michael Fleshner, and I'm actually based in the United States as well, on the East Coast, actually kind of in the center, if you were looking at a map of the United States, in New Jersey. And my company, which is Big Fin Solutions, has really been focused on SEO largely as it was originated, but then expanded to cover really all different forms of digital marketing, especially as Google has made so many algorithm changes. They're really looking for more of a dynamic, holistic experience. We've been forced to grow and expand as well. So everything from paid search to video to developing websites and other forms of optimization, even including reputation management. So trying to control that whole page of Google, the first page of Google. My international interest is really based on some of the agencies and some of the clients that we've worked with who have an international presence. And what I quickly learned is you can't take exactly what you know from domestic SEO and all of a sudden apply it to your international sites or international pages and expect the same result. So I kind of had a hard road in terms of learning and kind of expanding my knowledge of international SEO. So I was hoping to share some of that today.
Wonderful, thank you, Michael. And the odd one out, who isn't a Michael, is Lucas.
Hello, it's an honor to be again in your show, David. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Lucas Zelazny, and I'm living in London, originally from Poland, 10 years here with SEO, currently working for a usage price comparison website for the last 3 years. Before, I was in a company called HomeAway, American company, which had a presence in many different countries and had a website in many different languages. So I hope I will be able to give a couple of useful advices. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely, thanks for joining us, Lucas. Before we start off with the right way to do things, why don't we talk about the things that you see lots of businesses doing at the moment that aren't the right way of doing things, so the mistakes that you're seeing just now. So maybe starting off with Michael B. What would you say are the most common mistakes that people make regarding international SEO?
I'd say on the top of my list would be localization, translation, right? People think that It's okay. I can just translate my pages automatically or translate my keywords automatically using Google Translate or using a translator who doesn't know search, and that should be fine. And what a lot of people don't remember, especially in the U.S. or even in English languages, is the English as a language is very forgiving. The U.S. as a country is very trustful, right, if that's a word. So when somebody speaks to us in different languages, it's easy for us to decipher. It's also easy for us to have a certain level of trust, right? We're pretty much open all the time to all kinds of new products and so forth. The problem that a lot of North American or English or maybe Australian or English-based countries is language, the way that we see the language is the same in other countries. So, and take German, for example. If I translated German, I can't think that, okay, well, they'll get it. I'm going to write this page and they're going to see it and they're going to get it. Even if it's wrong, it doesn't matter. Well, no, it does matter. Number one, people aren't going to trust you if the content on the page doesn't look right, for one, right? And for two, languages outside of English aren't that forgiving. You can't make a mistake. One little tiny mistake throws off everything, and it just doesn't make sense purely at all. So I'd say localization is probably the biggest one.
I thought it was quite interesting, actually. You were talking about different countries that speak English as well. Michael F., when you see businesses that conduct business in different English-speaking countries like Australia, UK, Canada, the United States, do you think that most businesses just use the same English in all of those websites, or do you see more businesses using different phraseology in those different countries? And if so, do you think it's better to actually even adjust the English for those local versions of the English language?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And really, to build on what Michael B. was talking about, there is kind of this foundational level of translating web pages to the native language in a way that is precise and makes sense. But I think a larger issue is that, especially with international companies that are looking to get the most from their websites, generally they don't go far beyond that. So first of all, they may not be interpreting things optimally, and then secondly, they make a literal translation. And I can tell you from working actually recently with a client from Canada, they have a domestic presence here in the United States, and they have a division in Canada. The Canadian version of the pages themselves are very different. How they present themselves, how they position themselves with their market, how they talk about the same products and services are different. And really the most efficient way, I think, or that I've learned to get there is, of course, you can start with a literal translation, but then you really need to work with people in the partner country to help educate you on how to change the web pages, how to change the text or the verbiage, or even the images that you use, right? So I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to international SEO. Even if you're working among English language or English-speaking countries, there are subtle variations that need to be addressed.
So Lucas, having grown up in Poland, you must have seen lots of websites that have tried to target themselves at the marketplace in Poland, and perhaps they've done it really, really badly. Maybe they've mixed up Polish and English and just made some terrible mistakes that made you not trust the website. What are some of the big glaring errors, the big mistakes that you would say businesses make with that kind of thing?
I will give you an example. For me, living here in England for 10 years, become very difficult to write an article about SEO in Polish, and I will give you an answer why. All these words like bounce rate, disavow files, and so on and so on, they in Poland, they have own way to translate this, and you cannot take this, oh, bounce rate is probably this, because they won't understand. So there are only two ways. first, you don't replace this word and you're still using English version of this word in the Polish article, which not always look great, or first, like I, just read a dictionary how to write these terms like visit, sessions, user, visitors, and so on and so on and so on. So I think this is exactly what Michael's told, that we're touching this, what is called a tone of voice. Yeah, you cannot translate this directly. And the second thing, you asked about the biggest error we ever saw recently. I have a one in my head. It was a Bulgarian website who wanted to sell their stuff worldwide. And they had this one-man offices in lots of countries. And these countries had own phone numbers. Instead of create a one page about how to call a specific office, they just duplicate whole 10,000 pages website and put this into specific country directories. So they had about 500,000 pages which been duplicate and the core of 10,000 pages. They were not ranking anywhere because of this approach, and obviously they haven't had an SEO expert in their company, so obviously they didn't know that this is the wrong thing. Little advice was able to fix, and they had lots of traffic, at least from their own core country and the core website. So I think like tone of voice and this little of technical knowledge is like a must when you're starting to implement this international online strategy.
I think one of the biggest challenges working as an SEO for a really big company is obviously you're going in there and there are lots of pre-existing websites and there are lots of issues that already exist. And the nicest thing possible would be to be able to actually get in there from the ground level and create a whole set of international websites based upon your own architecture, and not having to look at the horrible errors that perhaps already existed and perhaps you couldn't do anything about. But in an absolutely ideal world, if you could go in there and you could create a website from the ground up with your own recommended SEO architecture. To start off with, Michael B, would you actually recommend going, for instance, for TLDs for each country website, or do you think .com and country folder is sufficient, or perhaps you might even go for subdomain instead? Have you got any opinion regarding that?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of ccTLDs. So I think if you're very serious about a specific market, the best is to really develop a site with ccTLD. And there's a number of reasons for that. Besides in search, I mean, in search there are factors because you are now competing local to local rather than multinational to local. That actually helps. The other thing is trust. So you're trying to develop trust. Germans aren't fond of anything that's not German, for example, right? So if you're not a German company and you're trying to compete against a German company, you better be way better than the German company for them, and you better find a way to convince Germans that you're way better than a German company. And one way to do that is, of course, ccTLDs. Now, that's not possible for everybody, and it's not possible for every country. So you go into Latin America, and you've got Bolivia or Peru, and you've got all these different countries. There are cases where, depending on your business model, it wouldn't make sense at all to have ccTLDs in all these markets. My opinion, I'm not an advocate of subdomains because I think there's too many errors and problems that can happen with subdomains, especially when it comes to linking. But subdirectories and folders are probably okay to use when you're concentrating on markets that aren't your core focus, or you're just trying to regionalize something. Latin America is a great example of that. So I'd say ccTLDs first, subdirectory folders structure second, and subdomains last.
Michael F., I've seen quite a few companies that actually have their top-level, country-level domains, but actually forward them to folders on the .com. So they're controlling everything on the same server. I mean, they could do that with top-level domains, but perhaps it's a little bit easier to manage with everything on the .com and just forwarding these URLs, these domain names to the URL that they're actually hosting the homepage of the country on. Do you think that's an acceptable strategy, or do you think really if a company already has that .com structure in place, they should even think of moving to top-level domain names in each country?
Yeah, it's such a challenging question to ask and answer for a couple of different reasons. One is it largely depends on the authority of the domain. If it's a large international company, they have so much equity built up in their top-level domain that they may want to, like Michael was talking about, have because I also believe in folders as opposed to subdirectories. But they may have the countries sitting in folders, and they may want to point everybody back to the main site because they have that value and authority built up. I don't think that's as strong as a top-level domain in the country. That being said, you could always mask that domain so it appears that you're there, but ultimately someone's going to discover, right, once you get past the homepage, that you are in a subfolder, so to speak. So I think the answer to that question is really based on a lot of factors, and ultimately I believe as long as you are kind of avoiding some of the more common mistakes, like Lucas was talking about earlier with duplicate content, not following basic SEO optimization strategies like using proper metadata or using your href language tags if you're going to be redirecting people. I think either is okay, but it's largely based on the equity that you have built up in your own top-level domain.
So, Lucas, the two questions to you. Is a top-level domain for each country the ideal strategy that you would recommend? And also, if an international company already had lots of different country websites on a .com, is there ever a case where you'd actually recommend moving from that to a top-level domain strategy?
So I will I think what Michael's told, both is very, very much covering this topic. From my side, I just wanted to add that I like also to look on very successful big companies. Take a look on Google. They have ccTLDs, and they covered all the possibilities. The problem with ccTLD is that if you register something kind of cool for UK market, this domain may be taken for Poland, Germany, Russia, and so on and so on. So you may find it difficult to implement this strategy from the first point if your name is kind of a generic word. Because of that, I think it's good to, on the stage of planning what the company name should be and what the brand should be, to answer the fundamental question: can we reserve all the ccTLDs that we want, and how much it will cost? Because if we will go with 200, that's probably kind of cost that startup needs to consider. But if we want to target 10 countries, and we know that probably we won't be in South America in the next 20 years, maybe that's a good strategy. Answering your second question, I think that if your .com domain with the folders which targeting specific country, been there for years, got authority, my advice to everybody would be: do not touch this. Don't destroy what you have, because it's always like, it reminds me a little like people are trying to move furnitures in their room. If you're moving furnitures in the room won't be bigger. You're just moving the table from one side to another. Rather instead, think about how to make your website stronger, better, more content, more engaging things. Don't worry about the fact that, oh, it's .com and there is a folder, and now lots of people is talking about something which is more trendy. I will give you an example from the history. Take a look. 300 or 400 years ago, Constitution become like very, very very trendy thing. Every country wanted to have constitution. England stayed without constitution. There is no Constitution Act in England because, you know, they were maybe thinking that what they have is good. So if you have a good authority with your .com domain, please stay, don't destroy what you have.
Okay, great. Okay, but going back to what you were saying just a couple of minutes ago in relation to top-level domains, if you were going for that strategy, you mentioned that it might be a little bit more expensive.
Yes.
Do you think that it also would take more time? Do you need more people to manage a strategy that involves multiple domains as well, do you think?
I think not really. If you do this the right way, you can really use a similar number of resources. You know, let's say, let me give you the easiest example. If you're using WordPress-based websites, it's not that difficult to manage multiple instances of WordPress. I saw companies which are dealing with 4 or 5 WordPresses in the same team. So that's not an issue. The problem is that some country domains are really expensive, and we're talking about 100, 200 pounds a year. And the question is, when you have a startup which got only a couple of thousand on the beginning, that can be a quite huge cost. And what makes me also worry, it is the first question to answer: are these domains available? Can you take them all? Because if not, maybe you should change strategy, or maybe you should change the brand name to make sure you will secure all ccTLDs that you want.
You mentioned WordPress there. Do you know if using Multisite by WordPress is the best way of dealing with that? Yes,
that's the best. This is what I was thinking about, actually.
Okay, great stuff. Say you've got a strategy already in place. You're already in a few countries, but you're moving into a new country, and you're going with the top-level domain strategy. So you've registered a new domain name for that new country. Do you think prior to launching in that country, it's best to actually try and establish a website as being locally from that new country, and if so, what are some of the best ways to deal with that? Shall we start with the other Michael this time? Michael F., what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I definitely think that if you're going to take that strategy where you're country specific, again, in the planning and in the strategic development of that site, you really need to take into consideration, again, the tone, and I know Lucas talked about that earlier, but you also need to make sure that you're talking about your business, your products, your solutions. Most importantly, you're talking about your audience in a way that is localized, that is how they're used to finding solutions for the problems that they're seeking. And it's that strategy that honestly most companies really don't spend their time on. And I'm sure the other guys have seen this as well. You know, we're called in after the fact when they're not getting the traffic or they're not getting the conversions, because a lot of this work wasn't done initially. They just went in and duplicated what they did in the previous country. And they're just replicating bad decision making again and again and again. So I would definitely take that time on the strategy piece to make sure that even before I launched a website or built the website, that it really was appropriate for the country while implementing best practices that will ensure that it gets seen in search engine results. So
Lucas, prior to actually starting business in that country, if you've got maybe a 6-month period, would you launch a website with a few web pages on it and try and build links up to that site, local links, and demonstrate that that website is from that country? Or do you think just using Google Webmaster Tools and XML sitemaps and things like that is enough to demonstrate to Google that that website belongs to that new country?
I think you need to consider this problem very, very broad. So I would do everything multiple time. I would care about the content of the website, but also about technical things like sitemap, hreflangs, and making sure that Google Webmaster Tools is showing the right thing. And then, of course, Google Analytics, where we can see if the traffic we're receiving is the traffic we're looking for. I wanted to tell you something more. I like this kind of comparison from the real world, because online world is a very abstract. Do you like stand-up comedy, David?
I like some stand-up comedy.
You like some stand-up comedies, like George Carlin, Billy Connolly, Richard Pryor. I love them. Yeah. I love them. But you know what? I love stand-up comedy, but English, but I don't really like Polish stand-up comedy. And you know why? Because this is wrong. You shouldn't translate stand-up. Stand-up is a very English-American thing. The language needs to be English and the form, it's matched together. Right now, when you go into Poland, we have cabaret. That's our form. And that's a like bunch of actors who are doing this kind of sketch. And this is very funny, but you see, it's more like a Polish thing, and here is like English thing, and this is this kind of tone of voice we're talking about. So I think again, I will get back to what we said about tone of voice. Translating this just quickly to launch a website and gather some backlinks, I wouldn't say this is a good idea, you know, because it is very like kind of thinking about SEO like kind of a sprint. SEO is a marathon, it's 42 kilometers, and it's a long journey to be strong. So I think rather, instead of doing something fast for today and in 6 months maybe get back to this, I would rather take a little more time and start everything properly from the implementation to the, you know, getting the right results.
So, Michael B., do you think it's actually reasonable to think of launching in a new country without having any local people employed from that country working in your business? Can you just outsource the content, get the content written for you and publish without having that local understanding?
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have somebody on the ground in that market that you're moving into. You can hire a company that has the resources that are on the ground. I probably wouldn't recommend somebody who, for example, knows French and they studied French in school and they live in England, and you hire them to do your French site, right? So, yeah, they may understand some things about French, but they really need, I mean, the best practice is really to have a local person provide and research the content and provide the keyword research necessary for the client in that market, and to really, you know, provide a lot of value from a local standpoint, right? So just like a Chinese person, right? If a Chinese site wanted to launch in the U.S., they can often do it. Unfortunately, they'll hire somebody who's Chinese who lives in the U.S. to do it, and they'll mess it up, where they'd be better off hiring a U.S. firm that knows the content and knows the culture very well and knows how to talk to the audience here on the ground, that it's best for them to actually find somebody who knows the market.
So, I mean, building this personality, it almost relates to social media. And Lucas, I know that you're a fan of a few different social networks, and you're very curious, I think, about the impact that social can have on, not directly on web rankings, but the influence it can probably have on authority of websites, then as a result, web rankings over the long term as well. In relation to social media, do you think that it's also good to have separate social media accounts for each country website, or do you think you're better off having just one main social account and it's acceptable to be speaking in lots of different languages in that one main social account?
Again, this is the very good question, and the problem is the number of resources you need. Right now, you know, managing fan page of the company is like a full-time job. It's a full-time job. So KLM, I'm always giving as an example, they have about 30 people or more that are dealing with their Twitter. Yeah. So the question is, what resources you have? If not much, maybe one fan page is enough, and then communication is going in English, yeah? Because if you start mixing this, that looks super weird. On one fan page there is message in English, Chinese, Japanese, and so on and so on. If you have more resources, maybe localized pages for specific, I would say let make these pages match the ccTLD. If you have company name JP for Japan, make the same Facebook page. Yeah, so it match. Again, LinkedIn is giving fantastic opportunity because the same profile you can translate for many languages. And again, touching this this question and this topic about tone of voice. So Twitter, rather most of the people is using English, yeah, because Twitter in Poland, for example, having Polish version of Twitter wouldn't be that benefit because Twitter is not yet that popular in Poland. If you have Japanese version of the website, maybe it's worth to consider because as far as I remember, and I'm always saying this on conferences, Japanese love Twitter because they're using 2-3 letters word. So 140 letters is like a bloody essay. Yeah. So you know it's very popular in Japan. So again, there is no straightforward answer. I'm very sorry, but there is an answer like based on research and the resources you need and the popularity of the platform. Let's say Chinese. If you're targeting Chinese, maybe it's good to have a profile on Weibo, yeah, for example. So that I would go first with research, and then I would decide if I'm localizing social media fully, partly, or I'm not localizing.
Michael F., do you think there's any indication to think that having local social media profiles from the country that you're targeting will assist with driving more relevant local traffic to the site? Probably, yes, but first of all, but also actually demonstrating to search engines that your web pages are definitively for those countries, and therefore making search engines more comfortable that it should be ranking those pages in those local search engines?
Yeah, I think, David, actually there are 2 points that I want to address and maybe give some thoughts on. The first is, as we're kind of talking about, and I like where Lucas and Michael are going with kind of the tone, because I think it's so important. And I actually disagree a little bit in the sense that I feel that having a local asset on the ground who understands your business as well as the local digital space is the way to go. I understand that there are some resource constraints, and look, we deal with companies that, you know, are small shops. They're trying to expand into those markets because maybe they've started selling their products or services through, you know, eBay or Amazon or some other international platforms, but they really don't have the local resources. So I understand the challenges there, but I think one of the reasons why it is so important is largely because of this nuance that in Japan, the way that they interact with Twitter is very different than it is in the UK or the States or Poland, for that matter. And I think having that insight is really vital, because I believe personally, just based on the work that I've done, that the Google algorithm is not the same across every country. I think, yes, many of the criteria are exactly the same. You have to create a positive user experience, and they're evaluating that with their 200 plus factors, but I think it is evolving in certain countries, and it's not exactly the same. So to answer your question, I feel that the social media influence does vary from country to country. You know, here in the U.S., I just saw something recently about the impact that Twitter's having on website authority and impacting ranking, so on and so forth. And that's relatively new in the U.S. I mean, we've always known the impact of Twitter, but now there are actual studies showing that this is, in fact, you know, a legitimate influencer on ranking. So, you know, I don't know if there's really a simple answer to the question other than to say that the social media channels are important, but I would say maybe the engagement in a relative sense is all that more important, meaning that if in a particular country Twitter is the dominant social media channel, I'm sure Google is picking up on that. But it's not just about having a channel or having a profile. It's about the quality of the content, the level of engagement, and the utilization of that channel that really has the impact. So it's kind of a circuitous answer to your question, but you know, I think it does really require that local knowledge to leverage the right channels in the right way.
It's interesting what you were saying about you thinking that perhaps the Google algorithm is slightly different in each country. I was working in Australia in an SEO role there for about a year or so, and it was definitely easier to rank certain sites towards the top of Google for target keyword phrases, it's really difficult to try and determine whether that's because there's less competition in the marketplace,
Right.
or perhaps Google's algorithm isn't as evolved as it perhaps is in the UK or the US. So that's an interesting one. Michael B, have you got any thoughts about that? I mean, if you're targeting trying to increase the optimization of a website in another country, do you think that there might be different activities you would do in that country based upon perhaps the Google algorithm being slightly different?
Yeah, I mean, these are all good questions, and everybody's bringing up some great points. One point that Lucas made me think of is I don't know if you ever asked a Polish person, how are you, compared to an English person. So that should explain the Twitter problem, right? So there's a character limit in Twitter that Polish people probably would never really fill it. But then you ask a Japanese person, how are you, and you get just one letter, right? So yeah, I could definitely see how it's different. When it comes to social, it really depends. These are, we use social, of course, for content distribution and engagement, of course, in each market, and it really depends on the market. For example, China, right? So China is very interesting because social is the main focus. Before you get into search, right, there's no point to even get into search unless you really got social down in the Chinese market, okay? So the Chinese, number one, if you had a scale that shows the level of trust you have with one another, the Chinese are probably at the bottom, meaning that they don't even trust their own colleagues, their own companies, their own sites. They certainly don't trust foreign sites that come into their country. Social is a way to address this. They address it and they speak about it and they engage with people. So social is huge. And when it comes to Baidu has click-through rate as a ranking factor, right? And click-through rate can be driven through social. So that could increase, your rankings on Baidu, just having this social impact. And of course, Baidu also has their own version of Twitter built in and so forth. Social is definitely impactful when it comes to search. Now you asked me another question, and I went off on my thoughts around.
It was just related to the Google algorithm and whether or not you thought it was different in each country, and if you thought it was, how you would deal with that in terms of strategy.
So before I worked in search, I worked for a search engine, and the search engine, the CTO, he was the chief architect of 3 different search engines prior to me. And I was like a kid in a candy store, being an SEO and having a boss who wrote search engines for a living, and he's famous for it. And I'm like, okay, what's the golden key? What's the golden key? What's the golden key? And he's like, okay, you have to stop with that mentality, because the reality is this: you've got one keyword that has a competitive factor that changes the algorithm per keyword, right? So we come up with one plan. Here's our one design of what the perfect mathematical equation is for a algorithm. And now you've got all of these competitors, websites that are competing for X keyword, and you have all of these users competing for X keyword. So now both of these keywords are going into this almost chaotic formula where you cannot actually find the algorithm anymore because every keyword's different. Now in the US market and UK and many places where search is used a lot and there's lots of competition, the algorithm is harder to chase. But it's a pure algorithm. If you go into Australia where you don't have that competing factor anymore, right? So Australia, it's fresh. Now think about that one algorithm, that one mathematical equation. You don't have the amount of keyword competency, the website competency. So it's a lot more pure or closer to what the original algorithm was set at, right? And that goes back with what I was talking about before about ccTLDs and stuff like that, where if you're getting local content, you're getting local people to do the content, you're getting local to do social, and you are appearing local by using ccTLDs, you're in that primary section of the algorithm, and it's a lot easier to rank than trying to be an American company or a German company or whatever trying to get into another market. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, absolutely. And so in relation to what you were saying is really if the amount of web pages that are ranking is high in a particular marketplace and country, then the quality of results is going to be higher based upon the increased learning that the algorithm will actually have because of that. So is that what you were saying there as well?
Yeah, basically the algorithm is the same across each country, but each country, it starts fresh, right? So you don't have the same competitive factors. So in Australia, I mean, this is a great example for English to English, because you can easily see this in English versus another language. But English to English, you still have the same algorithm that Google set for the US. But in Australia, you don't have the same amount of people that are competing for the keyword, right? There's two focuses here: the amount of people searching for the keyword and the amount of people in websites that are competing for the keyword, right? If that factor is small, it's easier to win.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, all these subjects here, I'm sure they could be expanded upon and discussed in individual basis for a long time. I've got a few other topics here that I'd like to make sure that we at least discuss. One is in relation to user experience. Do you think, Lucas, do you think it's best that when a user lands on an international site for the first time, a .com with lots of different country folders, that the user goes to a generic page and that they select themselves which country they're from, and that's remembered? Do you think auto detection's a better idea to deal with that? And if so, what is perhaps a better way to deal with that auto detection of where that user's from?
I think I am personally a big fan of this choice for a user, at least for the first time. It's not only a nice user experience, but this is also a way to show that we respect our user and we know he's smart enough to choose, because you may have people who are on holidays in Spain, originally living in UK, and they opening version and they want to go to UK version. So it's very nice to give them at least the first time and this kind of ability to choose. If not, then obviously redirection based on IP class would be based on geolocalization would be good, and then this kind of, I would say, like a classic language selector, which is somewhere on the right corner of the website, where you have flags or you have languages. You can find multiple examples. One of the example I would like to share is a Trivago hotel website. I really like what they're doing in terms of geolocalization. So answering this in one phrase: first, let's leave user a little of choice, and then maybe start redirecting automatically.
Okay, and redirecting automatically, would you 302 redirect from the .com homepage to the country homepage then?
Rather, yes. I think that would be the proper thing to do.
Okay, and Michael F., Lucas mentioned that his preferred initial way of dealing with that would actually have a landing page and to give the user that opportunity to select the country. Now, in traditional digital marketing thinking, that's introducing another click, another page, another step into perhaps the transactional process, and that could perhaps put people off. Do you think that there's an argument for and against that, and what side of it do you lie on?
Yeah, I feel that it really depends on the company and the company setup. And let me explain what I mean. You know, we do work with an international company that has a large brand, and they do exactly what we're talking about. You get to a landing page, you pick your country, your language, and it redirects you. And I think that has a lot of positives. It reinforces the brand. It says we're going to create a customized experience for you based on your country and language, so on and so forth. So I think that option makes a lot of sense there. We also deal with a company that has a lot of international partners, which are like JVs, joint ventures. But the individual partners kind of operate on their own. And because of that, we do an IP redirect. Because for that user, they're going to have a customized experience with that international partner that really is going to be unique and doesn't necessarily reflect the tenets of that core brand. So in that situation, we do a redirect, and I think that's what makes sense there. So I'm less concerned about the additional click, maybe, as I am about what's going to create the best user experience overall, because even with that additional click, I think it does add value in certain situations.
And Michael B., are you of a similar train of mind that an extra click is certainly worthwhile for first-time visitors and adds to the user experience?
Yeah, Michael said it spot on. I mean, it really depends on the business model. I could reference one site that I particularly like when it comes to geolocation, and that's Xerox. So Xerox.com does a great job because it mixes everything. It allows the user to choose the country, and it also does a certain amount of redirection as well. So it mixes depending on their model. Another thing that Xerox does is if you look at their sites, you'll see that that a lot of them are either .coms or subdirectories, and a lot of them are ccTLDs. So it's, you know, you can have a mix of ccTLDs as well as subdirectories, and you can also set up your Xerox is a great example, but it really depends on your business model.
David, if I can add one more thing, I just wanted to mention airlines, where this model very often is in the place. When you're opening a front page of Jet Airways, Lufthansa, especially lots of these big Asian airlines, the first two things you need to define is what country you want to open a website from and what language. So they have even deeper mix, like British website in Chinese or a Chinese website in English, something like that.
Okay, I think that's great. It's really useful, I think, for the viewers to actually list a couple of companies that you think are doing a good job, because then they can obviously go away and check out these websites. So if anything else, any other website comes to mind as good examples over the next few moments, you know, feel free to think about it and mention that as well, because I think that'll be good resources as well. One other thing I wanted to discuss was the actual characters within a domain name, because it can perhaps be problematic to have non-English, I think they're called ASCII characters, within a domain name or a URL structure as well. I saw you nodding away there, Lucas. What are your thoughts on that one?
So when NASC, who is the responsible for .pl domain, released ability to use Polish characters, we have a couple of Polish characters which define special sounds we're using in Polish language, then the trend became that people really wanted to have both versions, or so you had like the version with only the standard alphabet plus the version with the special characters. Some words in Polish doesn't have the special words, yeah, like in German you have umlaut and so on and so on. So that's easier. But when you could protect both, let's say the word, let me think about the word, future, yeah, future sounds przyszłość, and there is two letters, S and C, which are S with a little dash and C with a little dash. So the perfect situation would be to protect both Polish pronunciation and simplify English letters pronunciation or Latin letters pronunciation. I never in my career saw a website which is using only domain with a country code characters, because majority of users will still be using this version without phonetic characters, the national characters. So protect both, or protect the alpha, the standard characters version domain. That's my answer.
Okay, and Michael F., can you see it changing in the future so that all the international characters that are out there actually are commonly used within domain names and URLs, or do you think it's unlikely to be the case?
You know, personally for me, I think it's unlikely. If it does happen, I think it will take some time. You know, I think the other dynamic that's happening as well, which we all have to be aware of, is within countries today, multiple languages are spoken, there's different dialects, so it can be a pretty complex thing to try to simplify, you know, through a localized URL type structure. So, I mean, it may change. I don't want to say that it won't, but I definitely agree with Lucas, just kind of adding on to what he's saying. I think protecting not only your domain names and kind of alpha characters, but if there is some sort of local option available, I'm not saying you need to go out and build a separate website, but I am a big fan of protecting, especially your brand name. So I definitely recommend that for listeners, to make sure that if there is something that you do need to localize, you're you know, essentially acquiring the mark for that, or purchasing the top level domain, or whatever the case may be.
And Michael B., if you're selecting URLs and letters within those URLs, is it fine just to actually use the English language to base those letters from for countries all over the world, or would you go for local lettering yourself?
I mean, I agree with both Lucas and Michael. So, you know, I agree wholeheartedly. The only thing I'd really have to add is in China, you've got what's called Pinyin, right? So actually, there's two things I want to add. Number one is China Pinyin. So Pinyin is using Latin words, and those Latin words, the browsers in China, and actually most browsers will take Pinyin and convert it, right, to the characters. So it automatically does it. So Pinyin, by far, works great in China. It's highly recommended. Number two is, if you're a small local company and you never plan on expanding out of Poland, I guess it would be okay to have, you know, your you know, characters in there. If maybe it matches your business, right? Because you have a special a character that's not English language, and I'm a small company. I'm never going to go anywhere else. People know me as this. And, you know, it probably is fine. It's not a best practice, because most people don't search that way, because they, you know, maybe they're missing a keyboard that's not Polish, and they're using an English keyboard, so they don't want to go through the trouble of finding the symbol. And but it is possible.
Okay, great. You're all offering so much information here. It's difficult to actually cover everything regarding international SEO, but it's a big subject, of course, as well. I'll tell you what, though. To conclude, let's try and cover even more by a bit of a quick-fire round and asking you all individually one question in relation to a particular element in international SEO, and then after that, we'll conclude by getting you to think about one thing that our viewers need to take away and particularly focus on or implement from our discussion. But the one initial question for Lucas, how would you define hreflang, and what's the best way to implement it?
How would I define it? I know where you're going with this question. Is this suggestion or directives? Was this like that? So I feel, let me do again like this kind of parallel to something we know what the flavor is. Let me compare hreflang with canonical tag. I feel like hreflang is stronger than canonical tag. However, again, something what is similar to canonical tag, it is that lots of people is doing mistakes with the implementation. I had a conversation with my friend Martina, and she told me, that was a year ago, she was like, well, everybody is talking about hreflangs, but nobody know how to implement this. Did you notice this? And she was from agency, so she know that this is the problem that they had from the agency side when they are dealing with customers. Again, when you have these days international website, hreflangs is a must. And no questions about that. So I would say it's much stronger than just a suggestion. It's more like a directive and strongly advised by search engines. It's been created to help us users and webmaster to make this right and also make life of the search engine easier.
Okay, and two other small questions in relation to that. Is it better including it in the header, XML map, both, or does it not matter? And also, there was one other question as well. I'll tell you what, I'll let you answer that one first, and I'll have a think about the second one.
I am fan of header, okay? It's like a nice concept of keeping all this, things that really matter, but are not typically about what is in the body section. So I would rather suggest in the first place to keeping this in the head of the page. If you really want sitemap, I'm not a big fan of the sitemap. I feel that sitemap is more or less like kind of a suggestion. It's not something obligatory. I'm sorry if you guys don't agree with me, but I think like it's much more important to keep this in the head.
Okay, that's interesting, actually. The other thing that I was going to ask you actually was, should you self-reference pages in hreflang as well, or is it okay to reference just the other pages that are the country versions of the page that you're on?
I feel like it's not a problem to self-reference. I would self-reference without any doubts.
Okay, great. And Michael B, other search engines. So all of us tend to focus on Google. Do you think that Bing or Yahoo, other search engines, have anything significantly different to focus on with regards to international SEO? Or is it right that we should just be mainly concerned about Google and not really think about other search engines?
I'm sorry, was that for Michael B?
Michael B, yes.
Oh, okay. I think we were all waiting.
Yeah. Too many Michaels.
So Michael B, you got what I was asking in relation to just other search engines, Bing, Yahoo. Should SEOs and international SEOs focus on them, or should Google just be the sole focus, do you think?
Well, it depends, right? So when it comes to international, I wouldn't really focus on Yahoo, only because they don't really have a presence. Yahoo does in Japan, but it's powered by Google. So really is the dominant player. Share and what you do on Google will affect of Bing traffic it has worldwide. However, when it comes to Russia, voice in the Russian market, Baidu in Chihu in China, both those are, and of course the neighbor in Korea. People use. So Google isn't a dominant player where they're not, where other search engines actually have an impact. Called Zelazny in the Czech Republic, that Czech people prefer to use over Google, or they use it about half as much as Google.
That's some great. No, that's wonderful, wonderful tips there. Unfortunately, you were cutting out a little bit there, but obviously the gist of what you were saying is that you have to look at which search engines are relevant and used in the countries that you're moving into, and it's so easy for us in based in English-speaking countries, just to think about the fact that perhaps we use Google all the time. It's not going to be the case necessarily with the country that you're moving into. So you have to have a look at which other search engines are the relevant ones there, and obviously they might operate in a slightly different way. So great thoughts there that you have to be looking at other search engines. And Michael F., in relation to hosting and linking, I'm thinking, do you think that if you're moving into a different country, you should actually try and have a host for your website within that country? And if you do have multiple hosts for your different websites, should you be concerned about interlinking between your different websites?
Well, let me start with the second question first. I think interlinking is always a good thing, especially if you are trying to reinforce your brand, build up link equity and authority, especially when you have a more seasoned website and you're launching newer websites. Specifically linking out to those websites is certainly recommended. The first question around hosting, that is a question that I think we've all been asking ourselves for probably the last 10 years, and there are really mixed results, at least from my perspective. I know that in some countries, having a local IP does make a difference. I know we were talking about Australia earlier. I've done work with a lot of companies in Sydney in particular, and whenever possible, we do try to have local hosting. But the reality is hosting today is a worldwide phenomenon. Even if here in the US you rent space on a GoDaddy server, that server isn't necessarily sitting in Texas or wherever they have one of their locations. It could be in the UK. It could be in Iceland. We were talking about Iceland before we jumped on the call. So I think it's become less important. However, if you are, let's say, operating a small business, and Michael B. was talking about this earlier, you know, if you have a small business in Poland and it's really targeted to that local market, then by all means you should have, I believe, a local hosting account. But if you are an international company, I just don't think it has the impact that it used to. So probably being less focused on the hosting piece for your larger brands. But as you get smaller and you have a smaller presence, I would recommend local hosting when it's available.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, everyone's shared so much today. I'm sure you could share so much more, but I can't unfortunately keep you all for the next 4 or 5 hours. I don't think that would be acceptable.
Go on, come on.
Yeah, it might be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Lucas is providing the Chateauneuf de Pape, so you've got the wine cellar behind you. So. I'll tell you what. Let's conclude. If you could just confirm, you know, your name, where you're from, and also one point in relation to international SEO from our discussion today. What's the one thing that our viewers need to take away and make sure that they're doing correctly now? So starting off with Lucas.
My name is Lucas Zelazny. It was a pleasure to be here. I'm working as a head of organic acquisition in uswitch.com, price comparison website based in London. And my advice is, when you're starting international website, is a big thing. Do a little of research, spend a little of time reading, especially some good sources like Google tutorials, webinars, search engine watch, search engine journal. Don't try to experiment, because that's so much time consuming to go back and reverse things that have been done in a couple of months. And then when you read this, you probably will see that href ranks, geolocalization, and giving ability for customer to choose language is not that complicated as it may look like. And also you will get lots of very useful knowledge for future projects. So this is like that's my advice for you guys.
Lovely. Okay. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Watch what other successful companies are already doing and copy their blueprint.
Absolutely.
And Michael B.
Hi. Thank you again for inviting me with these great panelists. So it's great hearing what they have to say, and I love being in their company. I wish we were all actually physically where Lucas is right now.
In the wine.
Having a beer. So talking about international. Again, my name it's Michael Bonfils or Bonfils. I usually say Bonfils because people call me Bone Feet if I don't. So we'll say Bonfils in this regard. I run a company called International Media Management. We're known for SEM International. Takeaway, I'd say the biggest takeaway is really about research, right? So getting into new countries. You can do this a number of ways. When you're looking at a new country and you're trying to decide to get into that market, you can start by doing what's called keyword research, right? So you can take your existing English or whatever language country that you're in, keywords, have them localized by an expert and provided a data with that. So you can see how many searches there are for those keywords. Does it make sense? That's one part of this research. The second is then looking at the competition, right? How much work is it going to take for me to get into this new market? And you can do that in a number of ways. Competitive, one thing that we do a lot is competitive content gap analysis, right? And what we do is we'll take a look and decide what the customer journey is. And for every segment of a customer journey, we look at who is the competitive dominant player in that country and how much content share they have in that specific vertical. And with that, we can tell how much content are we going to have to put in to actually make a difference in this market. So 2 factors. Market research, is it worth it with the keyword research that you do and the data? And second, how much work am I going to do to try to compete? Am I going to be able to compete as a factor to get into the market?
Great takeaways there. Thank you, Michael. And Michael F.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, David. Thanks for bringing us all together. Lucas and Michael really provided some great information, and I also appreciate you gentlemen just having the country-specific knowledge, because I think that's something that's rare, right? We don't find a lot of SEOs working across all these individual countries. So I learned a lot during the call, and I want to thank you guys for that. My name is Michael Fleshner. I'm the CEO of Big Fin Solutions. We're essentially a full-service digital agency with a focus on SEO and reputation management. But you know, when I think about organic SEO and I think about international or having an international presence, I think oftentimes it does seem overwhelming, and it's easy to get started. And I know, Lucas, you mentioned some of the Google tutorial videos. They're actually pretty good. A lot of people kind of shy away from them. But if you're just starting out and you're looking for foundational knowledge, I think that's one of the places I would start. But I also strongly recommend finding a partner on the ground. Is there someone in that local country? If even they can't, you know, necessarily build it for you, can they talk to you about the people, the culture? I think we talked about it on this call as the tone or tone of voice, just to get a little more insight into what that gap is. And Michael, you referred to that a moment ago. How are things different? Not so much how are they similar, but how are they different? Because I feel that where I've seen the greatest success with clients is when we can really play to those differences and create a robust user experience that increases engagement, not just across copy on the website that's translated properly, but again, the whole experience, images, social, content. You know, the title of one white paper is appealing in one market, but not necessarily another. So in order to create that engagement, you do need that level of customization, and I think finding a partner on the ground is really the best way to do that.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Michael, as well. And I'm David Bain. I'm Head of Growth for Analytics SEO. So you can find us over at analyticsseo.com. I'm also host of This Week in Organic. So thisweekinorganic.com. So regularly we have the weekly content marketing show discussing the latest SEO and content marketing news every Friday, UK time at 4 o'clock, East Coast USA time at 11 o'clock. So hopefully you'll come back and watch that at some point in the future. And I guess my takeaway, if you've actually made it through all the way to the end to this video would be to watch it again, because there's so much information there, and I guess it's so hard to actually take it all in to begin with. And if you can also possibly share it with people, that would be much appreciated as well. But hopefully we'll see you again back for future events. There'll be occasional specials in the future. I'm going to do a special on SEO in the travel industry in the future, possibly one on the automotive industry as well. It's so great, getting niche into these different subjects. And I was thinking, can we actually talk for an hour on international SEO? I'm sure we could talk for 4 or 5 hours. It's just been incredible. But it's been great to have 3 guys, Lucas and the 2 Michaels on, because they've shared their knowledge and demonstrated their true value. So go and visit their sites, check out what they do, and check out what your best competitors are doing, and learn from the best, and roll out your international plans in a way that really works from an international SEO perspective. But anyway, thank you again for today. That's all for now. So bye-bye for me, and bye from these guys, I guess. So bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.